Hi, and in this video I'd like to at last go over my review of patch 7.3, Shadows of Argus. I've deliberately left it until after all the content has been out and had time to settle, because I talked during the PTR and just before the patch went live about what I thought it would be like, but it is often quite a different beast when it does go live itself. On the PTR you're just testing content as and when they want you to test it, not necessarily in the order you'll be doing things when it goes live. This is most especially true when time gating is involved. And so it's that point I'll come on to first, which is definitely a big improvement. There are a number of improvements over patch 7.3 as compared to 7.2, the Broken Shore. One of which is with the Broken Shore, they tried to bring out new content every week for 12 weeks, which sounds great, but in reality meant that they were just keeping certain pieces of content back for no good reason. And what this new content each week often was just a quest. Like on one quest particularly, you had to go out and get a load of nether shards, bring them back to Khadgar, who decided he only wanted one after all. Hilarious. Thanks very much. This is much different. We've got all the content within 3 weeks, which in reality means 15 days because it came out on the start of the 3rd week. That being said, it was still a little bit misleading, and again, which is a good reason why I chose to do the review after it was all out, because what they said is we're going to have a couple of zones come out to begin with, and then in the 2nd week we'd have the final zone and then invasions, and then in the 3rd week we get the Netherlight Crucible and the dungeon. While all that is technically true, what they neglected to mention was that in Makari, the 3rd zone, in that 2nd week, although the zone would be released, we wouldn't be getting all the quests. So I was very much hoping that everything would be done and dusted by the end of the 2nd week. So when the 3rd week came around, I'm getting home from work just before raid time, and all I'd have to do is literally unlock the Netherlight Crucible. Well, it's not how it works. Fortunately, I was able to just sort of put off having anything to eat and doing any cooking when I came home to get those quests done. Some others may not. It's a very minor gripe because it would have only affected a very small number of people who would have wanted that Netherlight Crucible open so that they could boost their relics before the raid that day. But at the same time, it was unexpected. You only really found this out in that 2nd week when I was wandering around doing a stream of it, and suddenly someone said something that sort of made me think, hang on a minute, yes, I remember doing quests on the PTR that I haven't done this week and they're not here. Oh dear. But generally speaking, the time gating has been very good. The questing has also been good. I always said in the PTR cycle that the one big asset with Argus is the storyline. It's a very much story-driven patch, and people who like the storyline of World of Warcraft are going to love this patch for that. Of course, that side of it only lasts for a few weeks. In terms of the quests, you've got, I suppose, 3 major strands to them. There's the Army of the Light stuff there. So we get Turalyon and Illyria back after a good long time. People have been waiting for them to come back for a while. It was even a caption on a loading screen for a while that Illyria and Turalyon are out there somewhere. They're just not in the game yet. Then there was the storyline with Velen going back to when he left Argus, and that was a bit of a surprise because the idea was at the time, we didn't know that much about it. It was only sort of alluded to really, but the idea was that, of course, about 1/3 of the population of the Eredar and Argus followed Velen. He needed to get away. The Naru helped him to escape. It's not quite like that now. They seem to have changed something in the story whereby, although they're helping him to escape, that's certainly true, they're taking him away before he's expecting, leaving some of his allies behind. And when he begs Zira to go back, Zira says, nah, it's not your path, mate. You're off somewhere else. Then there's the Void and the Illyria style of things, which is a very interesting storyline, but one I think that is meant for the future. It is seeding a story that is yet to come. It's just laying the foundations for, I think, the next expansion. And then, of course, we had a number of cinematics in this patch. They boasted about how many cinematics there were, and you could certainly tell this when you were doing the quests and you were suddenly the screen would go black and that was it. You wouldn't see what was coming. Most of these cinematics were just really short clips, really. It was a little disappointing for me, but that's my fault for expecting too much. I should have guessed that a few of them would just be simple little clips like a few seconds and no more. Some of them were very much the storyline cinematics that I was looking forward to, that were done so well in Warlords of Draenor, for example. And most of them were pretty good. They didn't disappoint. But the real big one, of course, was the encounter with Zira and Illidan. And that was a bit of a shocker. Even though I'd done the quest leading up to it and the quest after it, you knew that something had gone down. But it was like, what happened here? And then the cinematic laid it bare. And at that point, I think our whole understanding of what the Naru are has fundamentally shifted to a certain extent. I know a lot of people are sort of saying, oh, well, it's just Zira, really, because the other Naru are not implicated. But I think there's a shift there in exactly how things are going down. But we will see, you know, as storylines unfold in the future, we will certainly see about that. In terms of the world quests, of course, it is strange, isn't it? In Warlords of Draenor, when they brought out Tanan Jungle, everyone chunted and moaned. It's like, oh, just more. It's just a zone full of Apexis dailies. Whereas when it happens in Legion, we've effectively still got a zone full of Apexis dailies, only they're called world quests. But people aren't complaining to the same extent. And I think that's probably because ultimately what people complained about in WoD was that there wasn't any real new content through the expansion. That is not the case in Legion. And so although there's no appreciable difference between Apexis dailies and the world quests, people are much better disposed towards the world quests, I think. But I am a little disappointed that for the number of world quests that are active at any time, there's a relatively small pool to choose from. Now, you sometimes, with the world quests on the Broken Shore and the Broken Isles, will get like the same one popping up a couple of consecutive times every now and then, but there's a large enough pool that you've not constantly got the same ones. I don't really feel that on Argus. I often feel that it's the same ones. Every now and then there will be one pop up that, you know, I hadn't done, so I'd been there for a week or two and hadn't seen it. But mostly it's the same old ones that you seem to be doing day after day when you are actually able to do them. So yeah, it gets more repetitive that I think than world quests in general, or that have been on the other zones, because there seems to be, for the number that are active, too small a pool. And I think could have done with a few more, or for fewer to be active. When it comes to the invasions, I actually prefer the Argus invasions, simply because I don't have to bother with them. What I mean by that is not have to do them. I mean that I just go in, 5 minutes later I'm out again with my goodies. That for me is preferable to the ones where it's more story driven and it takes much longer to do on the Broken Isle zones. But that's quite a cynical look, I think, because ultimately what am I saying here is that I don't really want to do them. I feel compelled to do them for the AP and potentially Veiled Argonite to a lesser extent, and I want to get in and out as soon as possible. Are they actually as good, if you're really interested in the invasion itself, than the Broken Isles ones? No, of course not. The Broken Isles ones have much more thought put into them, and they're more engaging for people who are interested in that sort of content. But for someone who just wants to get it out of the way, get it done, the new ones are great. So it's nice that we've got this sort of balance that you could, well, I say you could sort of do either. The problem, of course, with the Broken Isles ones is they're not always active. So if you're only online for a few hours a day, there will be several days in a row potentially when you will never see an invasion. That's just the nature of the beast, I'm afraid. In terms of the zones themselves, of course, they got a lot of stick for the fact there's no flying there. They're too crude, they're too rudimentary to realistically be able to put flying on. They have come in for some stick on that one. I personally, I've already talked about this, I'm on this side of not that bothered about flying. With flying, it's one of those things. If other people have flying, then of course I must have flying, because it does give you an operational advantage over another person. But if no one has flying, I'm perfectly happy to not have flying myself. But there's an awful lot of people who don't feel like that. Especially as you can get flying mounts. I mean, when you get Exalted with Army of the Light, you can get the Warframe, which I got straight away. And that's a flying mount you can't use on Argus. And Rares in the zones, I think, is a good system. You've got some rares which, of course, form the basis of world quests. And then you'll also have some other ones active as well, which sometimes will be part of world quests and sometimes are just active. They're not all active at any one time, so it allows you to sort of go around and say, I will see which rares are active. Some of them, of course, have a chance to give you a mount. Some of them can also give you the eggs, which also themselves have a chance to give you a mount. So there's a little bit of interest there. I think that's like the filling in the corners, isn't it? That's for people who have time to clear out all the world quests and just want to spend a little bit more time on Argus, so they can go around and check which rares are up that are not attached to world quests. So that's pretty decent, as well as the chests and stuff like that. And the fact that the chests, of course, could give you the Veiled Argonite. The Veiled Argonite is like the new Nether Shards, where you can get the baseline 910 gear from the vendor who has transported themselves to the Vindicar. That's a better system than Nether Shards, because with Nether Shards, you just had to do those invasions. You had to do like the quests on the Broken Shore and turn in your war supplies, or trust to luck and try and get some of that coin for the keys. This, the Veiled Argonite seems to be a better system than Nether Shards. You still get it from invasions. You can get some from some world quests. You get some from chests. You get some just from killing rares. So it's much more varied, and you can get a decent number of them. It doesn't take you that long to get enough to get a piece of gear, really, does it? So the flow of it, the rate at which you gather it and can spend it, seems better balanced to me, personally, anyway. Little bit disappointed that the only thing you can get for gear, I know that everyone can use it for gear, because, of course, if you get enough, then the odd piece will Titan Forge, and it might be decent. I've had an upgrade from it, a 930 socketed neck that was sort of very, very slightly better than what I already had. And of course, it's absolutely fantastic for my lower geared alts, and it would also be fantastic for newer players as well. So I would definitely say the Veiled Argonite is a refined and better system than Nether Shards was. Now, we have to come to the Crucible. I've talked about this in detail, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it here. And in fact, ironically, there's another video coming out after this about the Crucible, because Blizzard have had their say on it. Bringing it out when they did was a good idea. Bringing it out in the third week was much better than bringing it out in the first week. If they'd have brought out a lot of content in the first week, including the Crucible, inevitably the people who can spend all day doing that content would be in a better position for the raid. And you've got to think the Netherlight Crucible is obviously good for everyone, but it's of most benefit for serious players, whether they be Mythic Plus players or raiders. But for raiders in particular, then they would have wanted to. For the very next raid that the Netherlight Crucible was available, you want those stuff there. So for some people, that gives you a very short time. So the fact that they delayed that was a good thing. It meant you could do Argus stuff, do the content. It was, as I say, a bit of a surprise and a slight disappointment that you still had to do a fairly hefty amount of questing, even though it probably only took me 30 minutes. But I knew what I was doing. I knew where to go for the quests. For someone who it was completely new to, it may well have taken double that time before you actually got to the Netherlight Crucible. And if you're the sort of person who arrives back from work, as I say, just in time to raid, like maybe 20 minutes ahead of time, that doesn't really give you the time to do that. So a bit disappointing that, but it was good that it came out not straight away. In terms of the dungeon, I've not been able to do it on anything other than Heroic, just like in the PTR. I didn't do anything other than Heroic. So I've really just blasted my way through. It's, in terms of the dungeon from that point of view, it's just a bog standard dungeon. There's nothing particularly inspiring about it. But anecdotally, I've heard from people who have done it on a decent Mythic Plus key that it's way better tuned than the 7.2 dungeon, the Cathedral. For that reason alone, much improved. In fact, people have also said that they've actually quite enjoyed it. It's quite good learning the bosses when you don't know anything about the bosses. You fail a few times, but you get the hang of it, and it's actually described as being quite good fun. So the dungeon at a reasonable level of Mythic Plus, anecdotally, is good, and it's been balanced. So again, a big thumbs up there. Now, in terms of professions, a little bit of a backward step, I think, with the professions. So we can make a piece of gear that you can upgrade quite high. That's fairly good. The thing is, though, I'd much prefer a system, I suppose a little bit like in Warlords of Draenor, where your crafted gear, you could have it crafted up to a decent item level, but you were only allowed to wear so many pieces. I would have preferred it if you could make more pieces, but you were limited to how many you could wear. You still sort of are, I suppose. So, for example, as a blacksmith, only being able to make a chest piece. That's all fine and good if the chest piece of your plate wearer is behind. Fantastic, put that in. But it would be better if you could just make a piece that fills a gap, you know, that helps you. You've got overall reasonable gear, but maybe your boots aren't very good. They're a bit behind. You've never been able to find any decent boots. Well, now you can craft some boots, get those up to 935 item level and use those. That would have been better and would have benefited more people. As it is, it's not been that suitable. Dual crafting, obviously the big thing has been gems, epic gems. We can now get 200 of secondary stats. That has created a couple of issues. One of which is that it now means for some people that they don't wear their primary stat gem. You're allowed one 200 in your primary stat gem somewhere. Now, up to now, you would use that because 200 in your primary stat, I'm not going to say for every spec, but I'm going to say for most specs at least, is got to be better than 150 of any secondary stat. But when you can also have 200 of a secondary stat, that may not be the case. It may well be that you don't bother with your 200 strength or intellect or agility. What I think they probably should have done in this case was to have increased that, you know. So maybe increase the primary stat gem to a 300 or something. Relative power-wise, that would be fine because we've had these 200 gems right from the start. So 300 in that primary stat is probably not worth any more than 200 was at the start of Legion. And indeed may still be worth less anyway. So you wouldn't be making it overpowered, but you would still keep yourself in a situation where you still want that primary stat gem, which is not necessarily the case now, as I say. But the other side of it is actually crafting it. Now, I have a dual crafter, and I, first of all, did the quest. The quest was actually a bit of a pain, because it just told me, this quest just told me I had to go to a place and insert one of each type of gem, like raw gem, that I'd prospected. Didn't tell me how many there were, though. Didn't tell me what they were. So I prospected a load of ore that I'd gathered on my miner, and I got a few pieces. I thought, oh, okay, good. And then I went to the place and found it wasn't quite enough. So, yeah, it was annoying, that. But the real kicker for me was that once I'd done this, so I've done a quest whereby, first of all, I've been inconvenienced. It's been a bit of a pain. But it's not a huge quest. I'm not going to complain too much. Secondly, I've had to use one of each gem, which I don't get back. And then thirdly, you find out that in actual fact, I'd have been better off not just not bothering to get the quest, because cutting the gems, you're not going to make any gold out of it at all. It is cheaper to buy the cut gems than it is the raw gems. And another thing, I might as well have not prospected for the raw gems either, because it is a lot cheaper to buy even the raw gems compared to the amount of ore needed to get them from prospecting. Even when you take into account selling the gem chips, you are throwing money down the drain by prospecting the ore. Obviously, some people have to do it. If nobody did it, then of course it would be a different matter. But the market seems to be so full, at least on my server, and I can't imagine it's any different on anything other than maybe a very small server, that if you're a miner, you just sell the ore. And if you're a jewel crafter, don't bother, because just buy the cut gems, ready cut gems off the auction house. It's loads cheaper. So that's what I'm doing now. And some people will say, oh yeah, but I get the ore for free because I mine it. But it still has a market value. Why would you prospect this thing into 10,000 gold worth of stuff when you can sell it on the auction house for 50,000 gold worth of stuff, get 50,000 gold, spend your 10,000 gold on the gems you wanted, and you got 40,000 gold in your pocket? So, yeah, that was a bit of a... I mean, that's not Blizzard's fault, of course. That's just the nature of the economy where everyone can be an artisan craftsman. Now, there have also been a couple of improvements made. I would argue, and this is good as well, the fact that they've been on it with the improvements. And one improvement was, and it took me by surprise at first. At first, I thought I was actually being screwed over. because the invasion bosses, at the end of it, you sort of had to loot them. And then last week I noticed that I couldn't loot one, and I thought, what's going on here? And I thought it was because when people were killing the boss, they killed it quite quickly. I was still dealing with some trash, and I thought it's because I hadn't tagged the boss, and I thought, oh, I've been screwed here. I've been as useful as anyone, but because I didn't hit the boss, I don't get loot. That's not very fair. Yeah, I thought I'd been screwed over, and it happened again. And then I actually noticed that I was getting it automatically. So that's actually quite a good system, really. The fact you don't have to loot it, because sometimes it's a bit awkward. You just want to get straight out of there. Sometimes there is still trash about. It's still quite a dangerous place to be. The invasion events themselves are reasonably varied, but there is one invasion, of course, that is a nightmare. It's where you go into like a shadowy, Zangarmarshi type area and get absolutely battered by shadow damage from huge ads going around, which you can't really kill. I am pleased to say, at the point of which I'm writing this, that they have announced a hotfix that nerfs that damage. So I was on my super well geared paladin, who was set up, by the way, for solo leveling and therefore, or solo questing I should say, and therefore very survivable, was still finding myself in mortal danger and occasionally dying in that invasion. Other characters, unless they were attacked, my Blood Death Knight tended to be okay. As long as I could hit stuff, if I was running between mobs, then it was a different matter sometimes. But as long as I was able to hit stuff, I was generally okay. But yeah, there were just some characters I was just getting annihilated on. So I'm pleased to say they've fixed that one as well. So in summary, what I would say is the patch has generally been quite favourable. There are some things where I think Blizz shouldn't have done it. Like the Netherlight Crucible, just the way it works, not necessarily the concept, but the way it works is obviously something that the rest of the community are not very happy with, by and large. And yeah, I would say if I was to suggest an improvement, there should have been more world quests or fewer world quests active, just so that you don't feel like I've been on some days that, like most days I can't do all the world quests, but on the other, like weekend I generally can, and it's quite disconcerting to do some world quests and then a few hours later some more pop up and it's the same ones again. World quests by their nature are fairly repetitive, but when it's exactly the same world quest, then it becomes super repetitive and you just feel like you're on a treadmill. So I would caution against that. But in terms of the big positives, the fact that they haven't tried to string out the content leading all the way till the opening of Antorus is really good. The fact that we've basically got it now is fantastic. Also the fact that, you know, there's a much better system of getting the Veiled Argonites and therefore the gear. It's a better flow for that as well, so it's more rewarding. The fact that you get much more AP from the world quest than most standard world quests again makes it more rewarding, and the fact that the rep doesn't take a ridiculous amount of time, you know, you can get the rep in a reasonable amount of time. And of course we get our permanent augment rune, although some people have noted it's fairly expensive. You would have to buy an awful lot of normal defiled augment runes before you are saving any money, but of course we don't buy it to save money. We buy it for the convenience and the fact it takes up a single bag slot, and we don't have to worry if there's any on the auction house or something like that. So that's pretty good too. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed my review. What did you think about any of the points? Put them in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.